Today's morning coffee vinyl side. Eddie Condon, Dixieland Dance Party, 1958. Now where do you start with Eddie Condon? Obviously, Chicago. Born in 1905 in Indiana, the son of a barkeeper, and raised in the Chicago burbs, Eddie Condon knew the value of looking sharp, speaking his mind, and being prepared to throw down. He wasn't just tough, he was Chicago tough, which meant he was tough with style and attitude. An orientation that meant even if he didn't come out on top, his opponent would still finish a bit bloodied. Chicago usually trumped, one way or another. Eddie was a banjo and guitar player, and what made him distinct and in demand as a rhythm section player was his knowledge of chords. He was also a natural leader and organizer, so he often found himself leading sessions or bands despite not being a soloist per se. Entrepreneurial, his hustle was second to none, and he wasn't shy about going out and learning and giving credit to the cats who were better musicians than he was. In some ways, you can say this pursuit was instrumental in him developing his chops. He sought out the best, quite willing to observe and even surrender the room, learning and becoming a monster musician himself. This was good for Eddie, but it was also good for jazz as a genre. As he was coming into his own as a young cat in the 20s, music and the recording industry was strongly racially segregated, but his reverence and interest in the black side of the jazz divide inspired him to put together some of the first integrated recording sessions with black and white musicians. At the time, jazz, in its early tradition, had a white and black divide, and what jazz was and who jazz was for was still very much up for grabs. Though there were institutionalized forces trying to perpetuate the divide, the musicians, particularly the great ones, found themselves drawn together, pulled by unseen musical forces. Condon was instrumental in knitting together the two communities. But jazz didn't just have a black and white divide. There was a stylistic divide that centered around the primacy of improvisation in the form. Lots of people were happy with jazz as it was. Music for dancing, ordered and controlled, formulaic and familiar. Dixieland jazz was already hot enough to swing for a lot of people. They liked what they had, but musicians wanted to stretch out. They wanted to blow and to scuffle. And as much as the appearance of abandon in Dixieland suggested otherwise, musicians hated the ruts in the road, the tired and cliched twists and turns they found themselves locked into. Gigging musicians looking for a paycheck appreciated nightly engagements, filling dance halls and showrooms. But Condon wanted evolution as much as he wanted to gig, and in his mind, it wasn't either or. You could do both. A move to New York at the end of the 20s and establishing himself as a regular at Manhattan jazz club mecca Nick's, where he played Dixieland music, pushing against the restrictions of the genre, was key for Condon. He became a prolific session player and organizer, which led to radio broadcasts and the opening of his own self-named jazz club in 1945. He became famous enough as a jazz impresario that he published an autobiography of his life in music in 1948. Recording, touring, and opening more jazz clubs, I think he had 3 at one point, was what Eddie did for the rest of his days, including a tour of the UK in 1957 with most of the guys that are on this album. And I note this because it's a British pressing, so the tour must have helped open up a market there for him. And the only irony I find is that this album is titled Dixieland Dance Party. Dixieland being a term he hated using, as detailed very specifically in his book. But then again, as an entrepreneur, he was no dummy. The real trick to business, the real magic, is to sell the punters on what you want them to buy. Who cares what the title says? It's the music that really counts anyway. And this album has some amazing music, which is even funnier to me because when I saw the title, I groaned and didn't even want to play it.